Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
You can tell a lot about a company by where it invests. At ConocoPhillips, we're investing in Arctic science and engineering at the University of Alaska Anchorage. And we're supporting today's students and tomorrow's engineers at UAF. In fact, today, more than 100 of our employees are University of Alaska graduates. And our future is in their hands. We happen to think that's a pretty good investment. ConocoPhillips, Alaska's oil and gas company.
The National Weather Service.
Good Sunday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service. It's February the 23rd. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with the latest watches, warnings, and advisories, or the radar and satellite picture, current weather observations and forecasts anytime by heading to our website at weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov if you like the entire statewide view. By going to weather.gov and clicking on Alaska, it will take you in a little bit further into places that are served by the Fairbanks National Weather Service Office, the Anchorage National Weather Service Office, or in Southeast you'll find the Juneau Weather Service Office that way. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. Find each Weather Service office on Twitter, on Facebook under U.S. National Weather Service Alaska, and if you are out and about today and enjoying the bluebird sky across South Central or the interior or even Southeast, or taking pictures of snow out across the Seward Peninsula, or anything you'd like to share across the Arctic slope, we would love to see your pictures there on Facebook. Share them with us, and then we'll share them with everyone else. Find us on YouTube as well under NWS Anchorage during the afternoon. Of course, you get the daily afternoon map briefing around 3:30 to 4 o'clock. And you search NWS Anchorage at the top bar, or later in the evening, search AKWX TV, and you'll find this entire broadcast, or join the alaskapublic.org community on our webpage with our broadcast partner here at Alaska Public, and you can get the video player on the right side of their web screen as well. So lots of ways to get what you're watching right now. Here's a look at the latest hazardous weather outlook across Southeast. We're watching for wind chill issues there across the White Pass area. Wind chill values could drop to about 30 below. That'll start around 10 o'clock tonight and go into Monday morning. So if you're traveling through White Pass, plan on some windy and exceptionally cold conditions there. Of course, with the wind chill advisory there, you want to make sure that you're taking necessary precautions. If you have to be outside for any length of time, make sure that your exposed skin is covered up and taken care of there, as frostbite can occur very quickly in conditions like that. Looking farther northward, the advisories across the Arctic coast yesterday have been allowed to expire. Blizzard warnings continue for the western tip of the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island, and that'll go until about 9 o'clock tonight. 4 to 6 inches of snow in total is expected to fall in that region, with northeasterly winds 25 to 40 miles per hour sustained, gusting up to 60 miles per hour, reducing visibility again, perhaps down to 0 at times. So be careful in that area, at least through 9 o'clock, through the late evening hours, and the next few hours for that matter. Conditions should gradually begin to improve. Now across the YK Delta there, north of Hooper Bay and, well, not quite to Stebbins, about another inch of snow is expected there. A winter weather advisory is posted for you. Visibility could drop down to about a half mile or less. Winds are going to be blustery as well, anywhere from the south and east, about 25 to 35 miles per hour. Gusts there could reach up to 55 miles per hour. That's going to go until 9 o'clock as well tonight. So again, conditions should gradually improve over the next few hours, but those winter weather advisories and blizzard warnings are still in effect for the west, and nothing going right now for the Aleutians. As we look out across the North Pacific and the West Pacific, watch as you pick out several areas of low pressure. One of those is working toward the Gulf now, and the overall circulation with the upper level low across the western Bering Sea and the southern tip of the Kamchatka Peninsula continues to spin and work against that cold air working off the continent from the west coast. You'll notice a lot of that speckledy color I like to talk about a lot of the time. This is indicating that cold, dry air wrapping into the southern side of the storm. What you don't see is a huge plume of moisture all the way out toward Asia. But if you could look a little bit further south, something that's got our attention and something we're watching carefully is a lot of convection or upward moving air down in the tropics here. And because of that, it may start to help storms like this reach into some subtropical moisture as we get into perhaps midweek next week, say Tuesday night into Wednesday and maybe beyond. And that may change the shape of the weather across southwest and south central and southeastern Alaska. So we're keeping close watch on how that develops and interacts with our weather patterns that we're seeing right now and ones that could shape up. As we look at Alaska, once again, I'll remind you that this low kind of grayish transparent color here is a satellite picture picking up a lot of cold air. We're really going to focus on this plume of moisture here that's stretched all the way into the eastern side of the Pacific and the west coast of Alaska. Now, this is not the moisture that we've seen trapped all the way down toward the subtropics and the tropical areas, the stuff that I'm talking about just a moment ago. But you can see the storm that was working its way up across the North Pacific a little while ago. Let's put this into motion. And again, this is a lot of low cloud cover and stratus. The really deep moistures more across the western parts of Alaska, the Bering Strait, and that's where we're seeing icing reports. And we also had a number of, at least a couple, severe turbulence reports there on the western side of the Alaska Range, on the west side of Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, out around Sparivon, I believe. So some tough flying weather out across the west today for sure, not only for visibility and precipitation and ice, but also for turbulence, as you would expect. For southeast, a pretty clear day, but some strong wind gusts throughout the region there today. And for most of the interior, a relatively clear day. Some patchy fog from time to time, but it didn't look like very much at all. Most of the Arctic coast was dealing with some gusty winds up to 30, 40 miles an hour at times, making you feel considerably colder. You get out around St. Paul, conditions seem to improve pretty quickly to the west. Scattered clouds around the central and western Aleutians, but precipitation was lacking except for areas along the west coast. We saw just a little bit of light snow there, perhaps around Seldovia earlier today, maybe into Homer. It looked like a lot of that was falling overhead and maybe producing a pretty deep cloud cover, but it didn't look like a whole lot was actually falling on the ground as far as we could tell. After a check earlier this morning, looks like most of that will stay light, if any, through the rest of today and tonight. As you look out across the west coast, though, the western tip of the Seward Peninsula to Nome, the northern parts of the YK Delta, all looking at precipitation. Some of that could come and go, and around Kodiak Island, most of that will be rain and snow. Southeast still looking pretty dry this afternoon with some gusty winds there thanks to high pressure sitting across the western parts of the Yukon and low pressure sitting just west of Bellingham. As we head into tonight, areas of snow and blowing snow are likely across the ice and through the Bering Strait and the YK Delta. Rain and snow will continue for parts of southwest Alaska and Kodiak Island. A frontal boundary is working up through the northern Gulf with high pressure still in charge of the interior and the western Yukon, and of course across southeast where the pressure gradient will likely keep the winds up, especially in areas like White Pass will feel the effects of that with wind chill that could drop to about 30 below. As we head into Monday, really no major change for the interior or for southeast. You'll keep your dry sky and your dry air with low pressure developing just south of Yakutat and west. We'll keep the moisture field right across south and western Alaska and Kodiak and probably the YK Delta and the Bering Strait, all looking at rain and snow, or just plain snow, some of that with wind across the ice. Areas of fog across the central Bering, rain showers across the central Aleutians and the Gulf, and of course across the Pacific Northwest. Once we get into Tuesday, high pressure starts working its way a little bit further westward. That's going to change the shape of the wind pattern somewhat and will allow for a storm to move into the Gulf and strengthen it. 974 millibars. You can barely see that circulation here, but it should help to draw out more of a southeasterly fetch across the eastern Gulf, which eventually will mean more cloud cover as we get into Tuesday night and Wednesday. Probably some precipitation for southeast, but it looks like right now most of southeast will be pretty dry. Once we get into Tuesday night and Wednesday, we'll start to see some precipitation chances working northern, more and more northerly into probably some areas in south central and southwestern Alaska. The question is, how big of an influence will this high pressure ridge be in keeping that shifted southward? The other question is, how much will that affect any precipitation chances across the west coast of Alaska? Places like Nome, the northern YK, Kotzebue Sound could all be looking at snow showers in this type of pattern, but how much and for how long, we're going to have to watch this. This is a changing situation there, so expect an update on this as we head into tomorrow. Low pressure across the Aleutians and the western Bering Sea at 999 millibars, dragging a trough through very slowly and also creating more clouds and scattered showers of rain, snow, and a rain-snow mix as it goes. Things still pretty dry across the Arctic coast, but areas of fog and flurries should be expected thanks to a lingering frontal boundary there. Here's a look at temperatures today. 30s across southeast, some areas closing in on 40 degrees. Sitka 36, Juneau 34. Around Yakutat 39 degrees. Prince William Sound in the 20s and 30s today. Valdez was 25. Homer and Seward in the upper 30s, almost 40 again. Kenai 29. Anchorage about 28 if you're flying through town for Ferrandi. 25 around Talkeetna, 4 below in Glen Ellen. And temps in the interior anywhere from the low to mid-teens. Around Fairbanks, Tanana was 9. 15 up around Ambler and Bettles, and as you get a little further north into Arctic Village, down to 0, 10 above in Anaktuvuk Pass. You can consider the warming pattern here certainly having an effect there. Temperatures between 0 and 10 below for the Arctic coast, 7 below in Kaktovik, so really not too bad unless you're factoring in the wind. Of course, then the wind chill there was pretty substantial. Teens, 20s, and 30s for parts of the Kotzebue Sound region. Kivalina about 30 degrees, 29 in Nome. St. Lawrence Island with blizzard conditions at 37. McGrath was showing 22. 36 in Bethel. Amonik was about 32 degrees as well. Bristol Bay, temps in the mid to upper 30s today. The Pribilof is also in the mid 30s. Kodiak Island, mid 30s for you, 37 in Kodiak itself. Sandpoint about 37. Dutch Harbor in Alaska, 39, and 32 in Shemya. Overnight low temperatures will be pretty chilly, the coldest of which will be north of the Yukon Valley. For Arctic Village and Fort Yukon, some of the coldest temperatures there. Northway and Eagle, anywhere from minus 15 to minus 25. Fairbanks about minus 20, pretty close to where you were last night. Kodiak 34, low to mid 30s for most of the chain, 26 in St. Lawrence Island, the Arctic coast, 15 to 25 below. Southeast looking at temps in the teens and single digits, in fact, 24 in Sitka. Juneau about 12. Ketchikan and Annette low 20s, so pretty chilly for you. Teens and low 20s for most of south central Alaska, with high temperatures tomorrow likely reaching into the lower to mid 30s. Around Prince William Sound, closer to 40 degrees, in some areas close to Cordova, about the same in Kodiak. Mid-30s for the chain in the Alaska Peninsula. The YK Delta expecting high temps just at or above freezing there. And once you get north of Amonik again, temps cool off into Norton Sound into the teens and 20s, like Unalakleet at 22. Nome is expecting a high of 26. The Arctic coast 5 to 10 below. The interior, including Fairbanks, in the low to mid-teens, maybe single digits out east. And again, south central, lower 30s, southeast, low to mid 30s tomorrow. Some places getting closer to 40 down around Ketchikan and Annette. Flying weather shows a wide swath of IFR across St. Lawrence Island into eastern parts of Siberia. The interior is clear and some patches of MVFR should be expected to the west and south. Past conditions look to be pretty good. VFR conditions really in just about all areas. One area that will see some changes slowly, Lake Clark. MVFR develops as the afternoon goes on. VFR in Rainy Pass and in Windy Pass tomorrow. And the rest of the way around the Alaska Range looks good. VFR there in Mentasta Pass. Tanita Pass looks to be VFR through the day. Porter's Pass should be fine, and Chilkoot and White Pass at this point look to be okay. Freezing levels tell that tale of high pressure developing across the central parts of Alaska and cutting off from the jet stream, as you'll see in a minute, bringing freezing levels as high as 8,000 feet. The surface freezing line also now north of the Pribilofs. And here's some more warm air working into the Gulf with freezing levels closing in at 2,000 feet around Kodiak Island. Icing potential mainly across the west coast below 18,000 feet, so pretty high up there, and above 8,000 feet. Same goes for southwest, anywhere below 14,000 feet and above 4,000 feet, anywhere from light to occasional moderate there. Some of that again could be freezing rain, so watch for clear ice. Here's the jet stream. You see that huge ridge developing here. High pressure across the western Yukon, forcing that warmer air across the west coast. For right now, that's going to keep most of south central and southwestern areas a little bit different there. The dry weather for the interior and south central and southeast continues, and the main focus for stormy and wet weather will be across the west coast with this pattern. At 9,000 feet, here's our ridge. Stronger winds across south central and southwest between 20 and 30 knots. And you can see a change in the weather pattern out across the west with 25 to 30 knot winds coming in from the south and southwest. At 3,000 feet, a south and easterly flow working up the panhandle there. Winds are pretty light across the Yukon and the interior between 5 and 10 knots as they make it across the Arctic coast. Another disturbance there just west of Cape Newenham. And you can see winds are fairly light as they cross over on the north side of the newest storm for the North Pacific. Turbulence potential, you should expect it across really all coastal areas. Below 4,000 feet in south central and southeast. For southwest, below 6,000 feet. Some of that, again, could reach isolated to occasional severe, as we saw today just west of the Alaska Range and all the way up the west coast. Broad area of occasional moderate turbulence, at least below 6,000 feet, and light chop expected all the way up the Arctic coast. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Now, there are 6 other categories of weather phenomenon that are reported when they occur, and here's an example of one right here. You see this dust out here? That's an example of a really shifty wind with lots of changing around. That might be an example of a squall. What is the definition of a squall, you might want to know? Well, a squall is a sudden increase in wind speed of at least 16 knots, sustained at 22 knots or more for at least 1 minute. Holy mackerel, are you going to remember that definition? Probably not. It's very close to gustiness. What's the difference between a squall and a gust? Well, it's the duration of the terror. A gust is an abrupt change in the wind and doesn't last very long. A squall has the sustained wind speed, and that's the difference between the two. Now, let's take a look at the abbreviation. Squalls last at least 1 minute. Now, SQ stands for squall. FC is a funnel cloud. That makes sense, but that's one that has not touched the ground. If it's touched the ground, it's plus FC. Then it becomes a tornado or a water spout. DS stands for dust storm. SS stands for sandstorm. PO is a dust or sand whirl, otherwise known as a dust devil. Now, how in the Sam Hill are we going to remember that? Well, if you get caught in an airplane in a dust devil or a sand whirl or dust whirl, there's lots of grit flying around and it might just polish off your aircraft. So think of PO, polished off, and that is a dust devil, and that's your way of remembering it. Now, sometimes you might have something like rain, as we have here, but it might be helpful to know a little bit more about that rain or obstruction of visibility, whatever it might be. For instance, is that rain coming from a thunderstorm or a shower? That'd be interesting to know. So they have descriptors, and there are 8 descriptors. Here are 5 of them. TS stands for thunderstorm. SH stands for showers. FZ is freezing. BL is blowing. And DR is low drifting. Now that makes an awful lot of sense. Even I understand it. Now, in case you're wondering what's the difference between blowing and low drifting, it's a matter of height. If dust or sand or snow is raised by the wind to less than 6 feet, then it's low drifting, or DR. But if it's raised to a height of more than 6 feet, then it's BL, or blowing. Now, you'll only see these descriptors used with dust, sand, and snow, and the only descriptor that's used with spray, by the way, is BL. Now, here are 3 more descriptors. These are only used with fog, or FG. First of all, MI is shallow. Once more, you're beginning to suspect that you're going to get a French lesson, aren't you? Well, you are. It comes from the French word
mince.
And if you want to help remember that, you can use the English word minimal. It's shallow. It's not very high. It's minimal in height. I'm sorry, folks. That's the best we could do. That's all we could think of. PR is partial. BC is patches. Once again, you're beginning to suspect you're going to get a French lesson. Well, it comes from the French word
bon.
But we're going to use something different to remember it. Because it's patches of fog, think of it as little bits and chunks of fog. That's the best we could do. BC, bits and chunks of fog, patches of fog.
Now remember that present weather is what's blowing around or falling out of the sky. And I would guess that this thunderstorm has a lot of present weather falling out of it. Let's take a look at how the present weather in a METAR is presented. The present weather is in this format or order. First of all, you've got the intensity or proximity. And what that is how bad or how close. Then what you've got is the descriptor. Remember, the descriptor is things like shallow, drifting, or showers. Then you have precipitation, things like rain, snow, drizzle. Then you have obscuration, which is fog, mist, stuff like that. And other weather, which includes miscellaneous things, but important things like dust storms and tornadoes. The intensity or the proximity can be combined in the same METAR observation, but they have to be in separate groups. Let's talk about the intensity. Intensity means how bad. How bad is the precipitation? Because intensity refers only to precipitation. Now, the intensity symbols are a dash, meaning that you have light precipitation, a plus for heavy precipitation, and if you have no sign at all, that means you have moderate precipitation. The intensity code always refers to the first type of precipitation. Other types of precipitation that may be present are then listed in the order of decreasing dominance. So let's assume that you have rain, you have snow, you have drizzle, and the observer decides that the snow is more dominant than the drizzle. The coding might look like this. You would have 4 statute miles. If the rain is light rain, we would have a dash light rain, SN for snow, and DZ for drizzle. So we have 4 statute miles visibility with light rain, snow, and drizzle. And that dash for light precipitation, because it refers to the first type of precipitation, is referring to the rain, not to the snow or to the drizzle. Now, you can always be sure that the precipitation is going to be listed in the order of decreasing effect on your flight. Now, intensity, as I said, always refers to precipitation or certain obscuration types. It does not refer to descriptors like thunderstorms, showers, freezing, blowing, or drifting. For instance, what we're saying here is the visibility is 3 statute miles with light rain, because rain is the precipitation. That is not light thunderstorm. It's light rain in thunderstorm, or thunderstorm with light rain, as it would be read to you. There is no such thing as a light thunderstorm. Now, METAR does not include a way to encode severe thunderstorms, but personally, I consider them all to be severe. Actually, the severity of a thunderstorm can be inferred from the other elements that are reported along with thunderstorms. Look for the strength of the wind and the gustiness of it, the presence of hail, lightning, and other weather associated with thunderstorms. By the way, TS for thunderstorm is the one descriptor that can be reported by itself without other weather if there's no precipitation occurring. And the reason this is possible is because how weather observers report a thunderstorm. They report a thunderstorm when the first lightning or thunder is detected at the station. The rain may not have started yet, so it is possible to have a thunderstorm with no precipitation. I wouldn't count on that condition to continue for long, but it does happen.
You can check out your METAR skills anytime by heading to our weather site at weather.gov/Alaska and look for observations there. The marine forecast for southeast tomorrow: gusty winds out of the Lynn Canal, 35 knots with a 10-foot sea, and freezing spray is possible there, so watch it there. Northerlies come all the way down Stevens Passage and into Frederick Sound. An easterly flow coming across the Clarence Strait and also across the coastal areas, blowing offshore 15 to 25 knots with seas ranging from 8 to 9 feet with higher gusts in all areas. That should diminish as we get into Tuesday. Winds coming offshore 15 to 25 knots will continue. Seas come up to 8 to 11 feet. We'll keep the northerly flow across the Lynn Canal and all the way down through areas into the Frederick Sound and Stevens Passage, and southeasterlies diminish a little bit, 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. The freezing spray, still a possibility there. The gusty winds, though, should subside a little bit on Tuesday. South Central, some gusty winds coming through the Barren Islands and the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula at 40 knots, 35 knots coming into Resurrection Bay. Easterlies there at 17 to 24-foot seas in the western Gulf, 17-foot seas there west of the Barren Islands, and northeasterlies coming down Cook Inlet, and also a stronger easterly flow across the northern parts of the Gulf of Alaska. Southeasterlies into Kodiak Island at 35 knots with a 22-foot sea, and the winds come up even more as we head into Tuesday, especially for Kodiak. 35 knots from the north and east through Shelikof Strait, and some stronger winds south of Kenai as well, 6-foot seas there, and east and northeasterly winds around Prince William Sound, inside and outside, between 25 and 30 knots. Across the Alaska Peninsula, easterly flow over Bristol Bay, 5-foot seas and ice-free waters. A south and southeasterly flow on the Pacific side with 11 to 14-foot seas. For Tuesday, a broader north and easterly flow sweeping down the peninsula with 40 to 45-knot winds there on the Pacific side. Expect higher gusts there around Castle Cape and south and west. 19-foot seas there, 14-foot seas a little bit further south of King Cove with a 25-knot wind from the east north of Cold Bay on the Bering Sea side. A variable flow thanks to a ridge of high pressure over parts of the Aleutians and a frontal boundary passing through. A variable flow north of Unalaska with a 6-foot sea. Easterlies on the south side of the chain south and westerly flow across the western parts of the chain on Monday. Watch as it changes again on Tuesday with west and southwesterly winds for the central and western parts of the chain, 15 to 25 knots there on Tuesday. And we're still dealing with northerlies west of Nikolsky, a 15-knot flow on the Bering Sea side with 8-foot seas there, and more of a northwesterly flow on the Pacific side, and easterly sweeping across the eastern parts of the chain, and Unalaska Nikolsky dealing with 20 to 30 knot winds in that direction. So quite a mess there across the chain as we start up the week. For the west coast, an east and southwest an east and southeasterly flow working up the west coast from the YK Delta, 25 to 35 knots there at times, and a broad southerly flow coming across the St. Matthew Island waters, more of a variable flow for the Pribilofs. By Tuesday, easterlies sweep across the southern half of the Bering Sea, 15 to 25 knot winds are expected. 7-foot seas there out of Kuskokwim Bay and across the Pribilofs with a light southerly flow working over St. Lawrence Island and toward the Bering Strait. And you'll see that reflected here in a moment on Monday's marine forecast for the Arctic coast, an east and southeasterly wind between 15 and 20 knots in all areas. And for Tuesday, there's our southerly flow punching through the Bering Strait at 10 to 15 knots, and easterlies continue and strengthen there north of Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse, and Kaktovik between 20 and 25 knots. Recapping tonight's weather, blizzard warnings and winter weather advisories for areas in the northern Yukon Delta and for the western tip of the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island area continue until 9 o'clock tonight. Several inches of snow still possible, and for St. Lawrence Island and the western Seward Peninsula, a couple inches of snow may remain possible for the northern Yukon. But the good news is all areas should see improving weather as we go into the evening hours. A frontal boundary across the Arctic coast helping to draw in a narrow band of precipitation all the way up the west coast. That will continue tomorrow. Periods of rain and snow around Kodiak Island and southwest, becoming all snow as you head north of the Yukon. Looks like dry conditions, but windy conditions will prevail for southeast, and for the interior, things are pretty quiet and clear. It goes for tonight and again tomorrow. Precipitation starts to work back into the Gulf as we start up next week. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.